Hello to everyone and welcome to our CalTPA Academy for Cycle 1. We're glad you could spend some time with us today, and we are very much looking forward to answering your questions and providing support. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. We do plan to be with you from now at 4:03 until 6 o'clock. If we finish early, great. But we will be here with you until 6 and answering all of your questions. So let's begin. We're going to start with this slide. We do need you to make sure that you have access to the materials that we're going to be reviewing with you this afternoon. So please make sure you have a copy of the Cycle 1 assessment guide that you can either look at online or that you have printed out perhaps and have a hard copy of. It will help you as we go through this presentation. And we will explain as we go along how you can access a recording of this post today, or if you want to share it with friends who also maybe could not be here with us today and would like to have the opportunity to hear about Cycle 1. So we will go through all of that with you as we move through the presentation. And with that, we'll go to the next slide and introduce ourselves. So my name is Amy Rising, and I am the Chief Deputy Director for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and very excited to be here with you. Have spent 22 years developing performance assessments for California, and very excited to see us at this point in time where we are in California with this work and to be here with you today. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, James Webb, to introduce himself.
Thank you, Amy. Yes, my name is James Webb. I am a consultant with the Performance Assessment Development, which is a part of the Professional Services Division, quite a mouthful there. I have been with the Commission for approximately 2 years. Prior to that, I was an induction director for the William S. Hart School District in Santa Clarita, California. Taught for 20 years English, and also worked in supporting students in English language development. Was an administrator, so I really have, I think, covered many aspects of education. And so very excited for you to be here. And just wanted to let you know there's someone not listed, but she is here with us representing our induction community, and that's Karen Sacramento. If you'd like to unmute and introduce yourself, Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Karen Sacramento, and I am also a consultant at the Commission, and I work with teacher induction programs across the state. So very glad to be with you this afternoon and to have this opportunity to go over the TPA.
Thank you. And notice what we're getting a little bit of background noise. Sounds like we're in a possibly a music room. If everyone could just make sure that they have muted themselves, that would really help us so that we can minimize all the background noise. I want to quickly go over our agenda for this afternoon. We are going to start with our norms in just a moment to help us move through our work for today. After that, Amy and I are going to present an overview of the CalTPA Cycle 1. This is the CalTPA so that we can go over the Commission-sponsored model for world language, single subject, and multiple subject. Then we are going to take a break at a point in the presentation because it'll be a lot of heavy lifting, and you'll be able to have this information at a YouTube link at our playlist. But then when we come back, we'll talk about strategies for completing CalTPA Cycle 1, especially if you are in a situation where you are online. We will talk about what those online considerations can be, and then we'll finally end with candidate supports. I am getting some questions about where will this be posted. The recording will be posted at the YouTube playlist that we will provide towards the end of the presentation. And somebody also asked where they could find their assessment guide. And Amy, would you be able to put in the exams website into the chat so that people can access that performance assessment guide, there is the CTC exams website that Amy will put into the chat for you. You'll be able to find your performance assessment guide there.
And James, I'm happy to do that, but help me remember it.
ctcexams.nesync.com.
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry.
Putting it in the chat for everyone right now, and this is where you can get to the materials.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate that. So our webinar norms that we'd like to make sure, as I said, please make sure that your microphone is muted. If we call on you to speak, please unmute yourself and we will recognize you to speak and ask your question. We do encourage you to use the chat feature to post your questions. And if you would at this time, go ahead and please put your name and also your affiliation, the school that where you received or are working to receive your preliminary credentials. So if I was a candidate at National University, I would write James Webb National University. Not the school where you may be teaching, but instead the school where you have worked or are working for your preliminary. Again, if you could put your name and that in the chat, we would greatly appreciate it because we want to make sure that we have an accurate record of who is with us today. Please keep your questions to a general focus about the CalTPA and not about a program or candidate specific inquiry. If you do have a specific question that may be an unusual situation or needs a little bit more attention, we will have email addresses at the end that you can direct that inquiry. We do ask, it is hard. I know it's the end of the day. Many of you have taught all day. It's long, but we ask that you avoid multitasking so that you can be focused and attend to the information we're presenting. If you do need to step away for, oh, Barbara West, you did your credential at Florida State. Amy, I have to take a moment. That's where I got my teaching credential. That's where I graduated from. So Barbara,
there you
have
go.
a fellow
Shout out to
Seminole.
Barbara West.
Yes.
Yay.
Thank you. Sorry, my multitasking went before. So we do ask that you avoid that multitasking, and we will honor your time and honor that of us so that we can have an end time at 6. Another norm that I just wanted to bring up, you heard that at the beginning of this webinar, we are recording it, so I do need to notify everyone that this is being recorded. So the first thing that we would like to do is that we would like to just go over briefly what are the instructional cycles of the CalTPA. Some of this may be familiar to you, but we thought that this would be a good review to help frame our work for this afternoon. There are 2 instructional cycles in the CalTPA. The first is learning about students and planning instruction. So briefly, cycle 1 is asking you to take a look at the students whom you are working with and that you select 3 focus students, one of whom is an English learner or a student for whom academic language may pose a concern, or a student who needs extra support in reading, writing, listening, or speaking. Focus student 2 is a student who may be on an IEP or receiving services through a 504 plan or a GATE placement. It could also be a student for whom there might be an undiagnosed disability and there or other considerations with regard to support services. And then finally, focus student 3 is a student for whom additional support may be needed, or a student that you would like to know more about, student who has maybe shared information with you, and it could influence the way that they are interacting or engaging in content-rich instruction. Then in cycle 2, assessment-driven instruction, candidates are asked to think about the ways that they will use assessment to drive instructional decisions for students. Regardless of the step, you'll see on the right that all follow the plan, teach and assess, reflect, apply cycle. In plan, You identify the standards that you're going to teach. You look at who your students are in front of you. You think about what are the strategies and the approaches that I need to provide in order to provide access for all students. And you work to really think about that planning phase, which is so important in instruction to ensure that all students have access to content. In the teach and assess, this is really where you the rubber hits the road and you're in the classroom and you're providing the lesson that you have worked diligently on to place in front of students. And at this moment, you do a metacognitive moment where through annotations, you provide a how and why the instructional decisions, or that delicate, as I like to call it, dance that you do with the students on why you are already making those decisions. Reflect is when you think about what you did in steps 1 and 2, and through a process of looking at evidence and looking at the past 2 steps, you reflect on your practice, what worked well, what do you need to have additional considerations with in order to approach this again. And then finally, in apply, you take all of that in and you apply it to next steps. What am I going to do differently? What am I going to do the same? And how am I always going to put an asset-based model when it comes to planning and teaching my students? So again, very general high-level view of the 2 instructional cycles and the 4 steps involved with each. I'm going to turn it to Amy, who's going to talk to you about the way that the cycle guides are constructed.
Great, thank you, James. So we want to start by situating all of you around an understanding of the guide that has been produced for you that you will use as you move through your performance assessment. So we're going to be starting with the guide, and we want to talk about how the guide is organized. So the contents of the cycle are presented in 3 different ways for you. So depending on what kind of learner you are, you should be able to find in the guide a way that will meet your needs for getting a sense of what this is all going to be about. So we start with an overview, and the overview of cycle 1 provides an understanding of sort of the theory of action behind this performance assessment. What are you going to be doing? Well, you're going to be learning about students, and you're going to be talking about one lesson that you are developing for your students based on their assets and learning needs. So in the overview, you're going to get some text about that. Then what we provide you with is a very succinct table. We call it the evidence table, and it lays out for you each of the 4 steps that James just walked you through. And it talks about what you will do in each of the steps of plan, teach and assess, reflect, and apply, and gives you a condensed version of what the evidence is that you will be putting together for each one of the 4 steps. Then what happens in the guide is you get a full description of each step and a set of expectations and questions that you will be thinking about and responding to as you move through step 1, which is planning for instruction and knowing who your students are. Step 2, where James said you get up on your feet and you teach and you video record and then you annotate your videos. Step 3, you step back, you reflect on your practice. What happened during your lesson? What happened with the students in front of you? What did they learn? What did you learn as a teacher? And then finally, how in step 4 will you apply what you have learned about this one lesson with this one set of students and your 3 focus students? So in the guide, you're going to see different ways to look at the performance assessment, and we're going to be walking through this guide with you and taking questions. So we're hoping that you do have either the guide up on your computer screen or you have a hard copy so that you can be taking notes and using a highlighter as we go through with you. So that takes us again to the next slide. A few other things we wanted to point out about the guide. We have areas in the guide where very specific information is pulled out for you, and we call these call out boxes because we're calling out to you as the reader about what is important and what you should be paying attention to. So you're going to see throughout the guide little boxes that are provided that illuminate details that regarding your submission and what you need to be doing and paying attention to. And then also in the guide at the end, you're going to see the list of essential questions that we are asking you to provide evidence for. And then each of the essential questions has what is called a rubric, and the analytic rubric provides levels of description of practice. And once an assessor looks at your submission of evidence, there will be a judgment made about your evidence up against the analytic rubric guide and that description, that qualitative description of practice. So we are going to look at all of these things with you as we go, but we wanted to start by saying, this is how the guide is organized. We have our overview, we have our evidence table, we have our in-depth step-by-step set of directions. At the end, we have our essential questions, and then we have our analytic rubrics. Next slide. So we're going to start first by talking about the rubrics and why they are so important to know pretty deeply before you really engage in this work, because the rubrics provide for you a description of what you need to demonstrate. So it's really important to review the rubrics, read them, think about them, and be aware of them as you engage in the work. So in your assessment guide that you have in front of you, if you go to page 20, you can begin to see those rubrics, and maybe some of you are already familiar with them, but we cannot say this often enough about how important it is to understand what these rubrics are laying out, because they describe the performance we need to see in your evidence. So here on the screen in front of you, we're going to just look at one of these rubrics together so that you can understand how the rubrics are set up. So these are in fact analytic rubrics, in that they are very detailed and specific about performance. So the rubric we're going to look at with you right now for a minute is rubric 1.6. It's from step 2, teach and assess. And in rubric 1.6, which is one of the 2 rubrics in teach and assess, there is an essential question. And that in this case is, how do you actively engage students in deep learning of content, monitor and/or informally assess their understanding, and explain to students next steps for learning? So in this essential question, there are several things, right? How do you engage students in deep learning of content? The content comes from the K-12 student academic content standards. How do you informally assess your students' progress and understanding that content? And finally, how do you help students know what their next step is for learning? So the way we use these rubrics is we have our essential question, which guides what we're measuring. And then we go right to level 3 in the middle of the rubric, because level 3 is what is reflected by the essential question and is the performance that is in the middle of the 5 levels of performance. And it's where we start our thinking about assessing your evidence. So in this case, in level 3, there are several things we're looking for. So your instruction, the candidate's instruction, an informal assessment, requires students to actively engage in deep learning, higher order thinking about the content. What is higher order thinking? Well, it's when children and students are engaged in analysis work, when they're engaged in synthesizing information, evaluating information and or data, interpreting that information or data, and sometimes we even get to see students transfer their knowledge. So that is higher order thinking, and we need to see instruction that includes higher order thinking opportunities for your students. So that's the first thing we're looking for. And then in level 3, at that score point, you need to monitor student understanding throughout the lesson, and you need to show how you're doing that. And then finally, you need to explain to students the next steps for learning. So if in your evidence you submit for rubric 1.6, we see all of these things in your evidence, then you will be scored at a level 3. If any one of these aspects of level 3 is missing, then you would be, in the assessor's mind, moved down to a level 2. And there's language in level 2 that represents that performance. If the evidence for the level 2 description is not in your evidence, then you could end up at a level 1, which is the very beginning level of our rubric. Now going back to level 3, if in fact we have evidence for everything that's listed under level 3, Then the assessor begins to consider, do I have evidence to move this score up to a level 4? So the candidate has provided instruction and informal assessment to actively engage students in deep learning. They have monitored student understanding throughout the lesson, and they have explained students about the next steps. So now I can wonder, did the candidate provide evidence around how students are provided opportunities to actively develop their own understanding linked to learning goals and monitoring student learning, right? So it's additive. So as once you have all of level 3, then you could potentially be scored at a level 4 if we have evidence for the language that's listed there in level 4. And if you move on up to level 5, that is when you are also able to show how you have promoted inclusion for all students by providing opportunities to participate in classroom discourse, the back and forth between the teacher and the student, or the students and other students, and members of the community. And students independently facilitate their own work. So if you are at a level 5, that means you have provided evidence that demonstrates all of level 3, all of level 4, and all of level 5. So you can see it's quite challenging to get to level 5. At the bottom of the rubric, where the arrow just popped up, it states the source of evidence that's looked at by the assessor. So to make the score judgment on this rubric 1.6, the assessor looks at Part E, the 3 annotated video clips. Each clip is no more than 5 minutes. So they are only looking at your annotated video clips to make a judgment on this rubric. So each of the rubrics, there are 8 rubrics in cycle 1, each is keyed to particular evidence. It's listed right there at the bottom of the rubric. And then below that are the TPEs, the teaching performance expectations that are being measured in this rubric. So there's a lot of information on a page around the rubric. There's our essential question that drives what we're looking for. There are the 5 levels of performance, and then we have our source of evidence, followed by the teaching performance expectations that are measured. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into cycle 1. And what we're going to do now with you is, over this first hour, we're going to go all the way through step 1 and all the way through step 2. Then we'll take a brief break, and when we come back, we'll talk about step 3 and step 4, and then all of the supports that are available to you as you move through this work in your program. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to James, who's going to take us through the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So what we're going to do first is we're going to ask you to open your assessment guide to page 6. I'm going to stop sharing the slide deck and actually switch to the guide. And so you'll see now that I have the guide up so that we can focus.
I have lost.
Make sure we're all on mute if you can. Thank you. And so again, we are in the reading of cycle 1. And what we wanted to do was talk about how you can read the evidence table. In the evidence table that is on page 6, you'll notice that the way that it's broken down is the cycle step is listed on the left. And then in the middle, it lists what you need to do. And
Sorry
so
to interrupt, James, but all of our page 6 is.
I'm sorry, can you
try
repeat that?
page 8. Our page 6 doesn't look like yours, so maybe we're on the wrong one.
Well, one thing that everyone should have is you should all have the version 4.1. So down here at the bottom, on the first page, it should say, and I'm using the multiple subject directions and rubric, but it should say version 4.1 because that is the correct version that we are that every candidate should be using.
Mine doesn't say that. I don't. Try page 4.
And at the somebody says the wrong link was posted. The place where you want to find this is going to be at the website that I'm putting, the ctcexams.nesinc.com. That's
Okay,
where you can find this correct version.
Where do we find it on that? Because that's. There's a lot on here.
So when you go to there, why don't I do this, Amy? Why don't I stop sharing my screen and let's go to the website.
Yeah, that would
So
be a
that-
big help. Thank you.
Okay, let me do that. So if I'm going to the website, I know this says Zoom, so let me just get to the website. So if I go to CTC exams, the place where I just sent to you,
Yeah, I have that link.
okay. If you go to CalTPA right here, and
You're
then
not
click,
currently sharing, but yeah, okay, CalTPA.
oh, because
Yeah,
it's,
James, your screen is not sharing yet.
okay. Let me try it like this. I'll try screen one. How about now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So then what you will do is right here, CalTPA, there's assessment materials
Yeah, okay.
and also preparation materials. So if I click on assessment materials, you'll see that the CalTPA program guide or excuse me, the overview, they're all here. And then under preparation materials, trying to get to the right
Yeah.
assessment materials right here. Here it is.
Wait.
Here's the CalTPA. It was under faculty policies and resources. And then the assessment materials are here.
Wait. Could you scroll up so I can see what the link tree is?
Sure. So it says CalTPA faculty policies and resources.
How did,
And-
oh, I see it down there.
And then you can scroll down here to the assessment materials. And here's multiple subject, single subject, and world languages. And notice that they do say updated September 10th. So these are the most current.
Got
Now,
it.
when you click on this, it's gonna, and it'll download the zip file. It's going to ask you for a password.
Oh.
They're password protected.
I don't have a password. I don't.
Yeah, we're gonna put that in the chat.
Okay.
So I'm just showing, so here at open file, notice here's everything, and then when you click on the first guide, I click on the multiple subjects, it's gonna ask you for a password. So what we're gonna do is in the chat, put the correct password.
Okay. And there's a lot of things in this file. Are we
Right.
clicking on the very top one?
Yeah, you'll click on the cycle 1 assessment guide. What follows that are Word documents of the templates.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, happy to follow this step by step. I know it's a lot of information. So if you'll just bear with me, Amy, I'm so sorry. I'm bringing up the password.
That's fine. Just take your time. While he's bringing up the password, I want to be very clear with all of you. You receive these assessment materials when you register for the assessment. You will never have to find them this way. You should have them already, and you should have received them when you registered for the performance assessment. If you haven't registered yet, no worries. You'll go to that Pearson website and register. And when you do, you will receive these materials directly. They will be sent to you directly. Does that make sense? You should have them in front of you. And if you haven't paid for your assessment yet, as someone just wrote, that's why you don't have them yet. But when you do register and pay for the assessment cycle, it's $150 for cycle 1. You will then receive the materials. The materials, however, are not a secret, and they are provided to all of your faculty and all of your support teachers, educators, instructors who are helping you through this process, because you should be supported as you move through this process. And we do want you to have everything you need. So no secrets here. This is one way to get to them. They are housed under faculty because it's the faculty that we need to make sure they're completely aware of what they need to know so they can be supportive to you. But when you, the candidate, pay for the assessment, they come directly to you. And it is very important. This is an important point, and I'm glad we're taking time to get everybody where they need to go. So if you don't know where to go, put a message in the chat. We'll try and help you. It's important to make sure you're using the right version. You need to be using the 2021 version of the assessment guide. Each year, we're in our 5th year of operation. Each year, things have changed slightly. And so we want to make sure you're in the right version. Things have not radically changed. So if you're using an older version, that's okay. You can still submit your work in an older version. It will still be scored. But we really would like to encourage you to use the 2021 version that James just took you to through this way, through the online website.
Amy, I don't mean to interrupt, but I did pay for mine, and they actually, what I was sent was not the rubric. They gave me a link, or I should say, I was able to download the program guide, but it is a very different looking guide. It's like the thick guide, I should say, and like the materials I need. But as far as the assessment materials for like the rubric, I was having problems accessing it, and thanks to you, I did find them. But where do I receive a code?
If you wouldn't mind, put your question in the chat. That would be helpful. When you sign up for the assessment, you will get the assessment guide. Inside the assessment guide are the rubrics.
Okay, the assessment guide that I have, it's like the CalTPA program guide. It does not have the rubrics. There's links, but I printed it. So
Yeah, the program guide that you're referring to, Lenore, is actually the program guide for universities. So you're actually going to want to go through that string that I believe it was Asia who was asking me about.
Yeah.
So it's going to be different. You actually downloaded the program guide for universities. So you're right. That's not going to help you as a candidate.
Right, because I found that, because that's what they actually sent me. That was the materials that they provided me, like along with the format, like to input my information and complete.
Asia, we're going to get back to you, but who provided that to you?
Well, when I purchased to submit my
okay,
my
well, why don't
CalTPA.
you hang on till the end and we'll come back and talk with you directly about that, because that sounds a little bit strange.
Right.
So let's continue on, and we'll try and make sure that you all have access. You're going to be able to see everything on the screen with us as we move through. And if you are still struggling to get to the materials, we're happy to help you at the end of this to get to them, so that we need to move on with our presentation now.
Well, what I was going to say.
So thank you for all your questions. Keep putting your questions in the chat and we'll try and address them as we go.
And so I just put the password to access the materials. It's capital C, the @ like you use an email, CalTPA, all lowercase, and then the number 21. So that is how you can access this for our purposes for this afternoon. And again, as Amy said, we will bring you, if there are some specific questions, we can certainly answer those as well. Okay. All right. So getting back to the evidence table, just trying to remember where I was. I'm going to stop sharing and then bring up the evidence table again. So again, we are on page 6, and this is if you printed it out, where you would be able to find it. I believe it might be page 8 in the PDF. But let me go ahead and share my screen and provide this information to you. So just again, where the evidence table is, the way it's read, again, is starting at the left, what the step is, what the candidate needs to do is in the middle, and there are specific bullets. And notice that there are items that are hyperlinked to the glossary or to specific sections in the guide that help to explain that particular aspect. And then on the left is the evidence to be submitted. and you'll see that it's written out by parts. So part A, part B, C, and D. So you'll see that in step 1, there are very pieces of evidence that are tied to this step. And so here, what you'll see is that you would, in step 1, submit your getting to know students, lesson plan, written narrative, and related instructional materials. You'll also know that with everything except for the lesson plan, there is a page limit. It's very important that you pay attention to the page limit. The page limit is not a suggestion, it is an absolute, because assessors are trained to only read through, for example, in part A, 9 pages, part C, 7, part D, 8. So please make sure that you follow the page number. This is then repeated through step 2. Again, what you need to do in your annotation titles and what is required evidence. So for step 2, it's part E, 3 annotated video clips, no more than 5 minutes. Again, not a suggestion, it is a requirement. So make sure that your video clips are no more than 5 minutes. Step 3 is a 3-page written narrative where you reflect, and page 4 in the apply, a 3-page narrative or a 5-minute video of your application. So we wanted to take you to the evidence guide or evidence table because it is a very quick, at your fingertips, this is what I need to do, okay? So now what I'll do is, Amy, if you'd like to just walk through step 1, here we are at plan.
Great. Thanks, James. So again, we're going to just pause, take a deep breath. We just looked at evidence table. The evidence table laid out 4 particular steps: plan, teach and assess, reflect, and apply. It's in a short version. You can get a bird's eye view. Now what we're going to be doing is moving through the guide. We're going to spend time on step 1, and we're going to look specifically at the language provided with all the detail related to step 1. Now remember, step 1 is all about your ability to plan instruction and know who your students are. So step 1 is all about planning. And in step 1, planning, which is the first thing you're going to do, right? That makes sense. We're going to plan what we're going to do. Then we're going to get up and teach and assess. Then we're going to reflect and apply. So this is all about planning. The first thing you're going to do is determine which class. You're going to pick one class of students that you're working with to be your focus in cycle 1. One class of students. And then you're going to make sure that you have permission from the students to be able to video record them. And this is an important step. And together as educators, we need to be keeping all of our students and children safe. So you must have permission to be able to video record them. You keep your permissions at your school site. And then if necessary, you can verify that, but you do not submit them as part of your evidence. So again, one class of students, and make sure you have a permission slip from each of those students signed by their families and or guardians that allows them to be visible in a video recording. Very important step. Once you get through that process of deciding which class you want to work with and you have your permissions from your students in place, then you need to get to know your students. And you're going to work with your master, mentor, or supervising teacher to do this. And you're going to think about other school personnel you might talk with. You possibly might talk with the families and guardians, and you might possibly talk with the students themselves to get to know them deeply. And you're going to really think about the assets that the students in front of you have. What do they already know? What languages do they speak? What assets culturally are they bringing to the classroom? And then you're also going to be considering what learning needs they have. You're going to establish for this one lesson that you're going to teach this one group of students, you're going to establish specific goals for learning, content-specific goals that are based on the pre-K-12 student academic content standards. And this is really important. If you have a highlighter or a marker, circle ELD goals, circle it like 5 times, because we absolutely need an English language development goal for the English learners in your class, particularly for focus student 1, because of the 3 focus students, focus student 1 is the student who is an English learner. So we need both content goals and ELD goals. Very important thing to remember. So as you go on, you can see now in front of you on the screen that we have a call out box. And this is what we talked about earlier. So these are really important bits of information that we pull out and put in a different ink color to kind of draw your attention to it. So this, I'm going to pause for a second and give you a second to read the call out box, because it talks about assets and how to talk with students and how to do it in an appropriate and supportive manner based on your student's developmental level. So just go ahead and take a second and read through that box. All right. What we're going to do is now move on. So the next thing that you're going to be doing is providing information about your whole class and then about your 3 individual focus students. So we need to know how you think about working with a group of children and students. And we also need to know how you're thinking about 3 individual types of learners in your class. So the whole group and then the 3 individual students. So in this next section, you're going to see a series of prompts that you're going to provide responses to around the whole class. So you're going to provide a description of your students' assets and their learning needs. So as we move into this first question here, this first prompt, you see that you're asked to write about your students' prior academic knowledge that's related to the content you're going to teach in your lesson. So what was it they learned yesterday? What was it they learned last week, last month, maybe in the grade before? What prior academic knowledge do your students have that's going to help them engage in the content you want to teach in your lesson? And you move on and we ask about English language proficiency levels, etc. And you'll respond to all of those prompts. Now, an important point here, James, if you'll scroll up just a second, is this next call out box that speaks to the definition of standard English learners. And we wanted to know not only about your students and their language assets that they have, but we also wanted to make sure that you were paying attention to the full range of language learners, from English language learners all the way through standard English language learners, and those of us, and perhaps yourself, who engaged in English along the way. All of us, right, are learning English every day. And so really we're all language learners. But we also wanted to draw your attention specifically to the definition for standard English learners, who are students for whom standard English is not native and whose home language differs in structure and form from standard and academic English. So it's important to understand which of your students are standard English learners, and then to write about them and to understand them and to understand the needs they have, and continuing to work with you as their teacher to develop their language. So all those questions all fall under 1, and then we move on into more contextual information about your class. So what grade level are you teaching? What are the age of your students? What's the content area in which you're working? Remember, in the CalTPA, in the performance assessment, there are 2 instructional cycles. So in one cycle, you're going to focus on literacy, and in the other cycle, you're going to focus on mathematics. It's your choice which one you want to focus on. So in cycle 1, it's either math or literacy. And then when you get to cycle 2, it's the opposite. So if you do literacy in cycle 1, you're going to do math in cycle 2 and vice versa. So we ask you for the content here. Then what is your instructional setting? Are you teaching in person? Are you teaching online in a synchronous way? Or is it hybrid? Is it sometimes in person, sometimes synchronously online? Then you respond to resources, materials you're going to use in your lesson, the total number of students. So how many in the whole class? How many are English learners? How many are standard English learners? How many have an IEP? How many have a 504 plan? How many students have been identified by the district for gifted and talented education? Then we move into more specific detail around dual language setting. And so if this is applicable and you're in a dual language setting, is it a bilingual program? And if so, what are the languages spoken? Is it a one-way immersion? Is it a two-way immersion? So once you complete your information gathering about your whole group of students and you think about the assets, the languages they're bringing into your classroom, what they already know about content, we're going to move on and think very specifically about the 3 focus students. So focus student 1 is the district identified English learner. It can be any student at any LPAC level. Or if you have redesignated English learners in your class, you may select one of them. Or if you have no district identified English learners and you have no redesignated English learners, then you can select a child or a student who's been identified or redesignated or who needs support with English language development. And if you pause and think about that for a moment, that's literally every child, every student in your classroom. Every student is an English language learner. And specifically, though, we'd like you to start by identifying a district identified English learner, because specifically your credential says that you are ready to teach English language development. And so we would like to see how you're doing that with an English language speaking, a student who is an English learner. So again, what is their current proficiency in reading, writing, speaking, or listening in English? And the mastery of that primary language, their primary language. B gets into prior academic knowledge. C is about their social identity. D looks at cultural and linguistic resources and funds of knowledge. What is this student's prior experiences and what are their interests? And what developmental considerations might you need to take into account as you think about planning instruction for this particular student? And what are their ELD goals? For focus student 2, we move on and ask you to identify a student in your classroom who is been identified as having a disability with an IEP or a 504 plan, or who has been identified for GATE. So any student in your group that has an IEP, a 504 plan, or who has been identified for GATE and might need additional supports in their instruction. If there are no identified students in your classroom on IEPs, 504s, or has been identified for GATE, then select a student who has recently been referred for specialized support or who requires additional learning support in the gen ed setting. We know for our youngest learners in pre-K, K, first grade, second grade, even sometimes, they're not yet identified, but we know that those children need support. And so you can identify a child who's not yet been fully through the IEP process. So you're going to describe the learning challenge and go on then and repeat the same kind of prompts that we had for focus student 1. So what is the prior academic knowledge for the specific content for the student for the lesson that you're about to teach? What is the student's social identity? Cultural and linguistic resources, funds of knowledge? What are their prior experiences and interests? What developmental considerations do you need to keep in mind for this student? And then what assistive technologies are appropriate, if any, for this student? And again, a call out box speaking to what I just said, which is for transitional kindergarten or primary grades, sometimes students have not yet been identified, but still they need support. And if you think about the multi-tiered system of supports at your school, then it could be a student who's been recently referred for evaluation or who is struggling in the content area. And then that brings us to focus student 3. And this is a student whose life experiences either in or outside of school may result in a need for additional academic or emotional support. So it's a student whose behavior in your class is catching your attention for one reason or another. And it could include a whole range of things. For example, you may have a student who just never selects to participate, or a student who falls asleep in class, a student who catches your attention, a student who may never speak, a student who demands a lot of attention from you. And you want to know more about them so that you can support and help them and build from their assets they bring into the lesson. So a long list of things that the student may have experienced in their life at home or in their community or at school. And a long list of issues that our students engage and experience. So it could be a student along any of these lines. And then again, the same list of prompts. So what is this student's life experience, either inside or outside of school, that results in their need for additional academic and/or emotional support in your classroom? What is their prior academic knowledge related to the content you're going to teach in your lesson? What is their social identity, cultural, linguistic resources, funds of knowledge they bring to the class? What prior experiences and interests does this student have? And then what developmental considerations do you want to keep in mind? So you've told us about the whole class, and then you've come through and told us about 3 specific focus students by responding to all of those prompts. And then because you now have a good understanding of your students in front of you that you're going to be teaching, we move into the lesson plan. So considerations for the one lesson plan for the one group of students and the 3 focus students. So again, in this section, series of prompts that lead you through lesson planning. And you may use your district lesson plan or the lesson plan you've worked on and learned about in your teacher preparation program or in your induction program, or you can use the optional lesson plan provided in the assessment guide. But we're going to be looking specifically at these questions. What are you planning to teach in the lesson? Great question for a lesson plan. And you need to go right to the California content standards or curriculum frameworks and the California English language development standards to get those standards and to think about what your goals are that you're going to create for your lesson. And then we need to know about the pedagogy, the content specific learning goals. And remember, it's either literacy or mathematics focus, but it can be integrated with other subject matter areas. What is your ELD goal? Where and how does this lesson fit into the larger unit of instruction? And what do you expect the students to learn and be able to do in the lesson, right? These are the basic tenets of lesson planning. The next question we're going to grapple with is how will you know whether students learn what you're planning to teach? And we call that informal assessment. How will you check for understanding as you move through your lesson? What activities are you going to do in your lesson? So you will describe those in your lesson plan. And then we move on to how you will plan your instruction to support learning through the activities. So again, very specific prompts that lead you through lesson planning, one lesson for your whole group and your 3 individual students. And then in this next section 3, you are going to provide a rationale. So you have your lesson plan, and then you're going to be thinking deeply about why you're doing what you're doing. So what is your prior academic content knowledge that these children and students need to know before you introduce them to the lesson? And again, what are those assets and learning needs? You're going to explain how the lesson incorporates those. You're going to tell us your rationale for the activities you choose. And remember, you're going to be incorporating higher order thinking in your lesson. So students need to be engaged in key ideas such as analysis, synthesis, evaluation, interpretation, and or transfer. So we need to see that, engaging students deeply in learning and thinking. And then what instructional strategies will you use? Many of you have been introduced to Universal Design for Learning. That's what UDL stands for. If you don't know about UDL yet, I encourage you to look it up and learn about it, because this is how we plan instruction for multiple modes of access and multiple ways for children and students to show us what they know about content. And then it's important to understand how you will group your students, how you will develop academic language, what resources and materials you'll use in your lesson, how you will check for understanding through assessments, the developmental considerations you have, and then specifically under number 10, what are you going to be doing to support your 3 focus students? And that brings us to the end of that step. So step 1, again, just at the highest level, is about understanding the assets and learning needs of your students, planning an asset-based lesson plan that meets the needs of your whole class and your 3 individual students, and then telling us about your lesson plan, what you're going to do, and why you're going to do it. So you see the evidences here. So you have your part A, which is the written narrative about getting to know your students. Then you're going to be telling us about your lesson plan. Again, it can be your local lesson plan or the one that is provided. And then you're going to write a rationale for why you're proposing to do what you are going to do in your lesson plan. What are you going to do as a teacher? What are your students going to do, and why? Knowing that all of this is leading to their acquisition of content and language development. And then finally, it's important to share what resources and materials will be used during this one lesson. So James, do we want to keep, we're gonna get here to Q&A on step 1, right?
Well, actually, I was going to provide a little bit more information that would help, but I'm thinking that I could go through that. And then I think maybe we need to take a quick break before we get into step 2.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again and I've been trying to keep up with all the questions, Amy. Maybe if you
Okay,
could
so
follow
I'll
them.
switch.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So Amy gave us some really good information with regard to the what we're seeing in step 1. And so what I wanted to do was, because this comes up with regard to looking at student assets, I wanted to show you this image that we have used with our education specialist candidates, but I also, it's very important with our general ed. So really, when you think about an asset model of approach in planning, what you're doing is you're wanting to look at students and recognizing their unique strengths and passions, looking at what personal powers they have, how they are bringing, a sense of funds of knowledge to the lesson or to the classroom, how universal design for learning, as Amy shared, is so important in a climate of differentiated instruction. And I like the last piece there with the drum, and it says, even though they are not marching to the beat of traditional school education, it doesn't mean that they're out of step. Many of our students, if we look at traditional schooling, and I hate to say this, but Amy will know where I'm going, is it really isn't built for many of our learners, especially those like for my own. I have 2 sons, and the idea of sitting down, being quiet, completing a packet, that really isn't what is best for a young mind, male, possibly even female, that really doesn't help them to develop their skills. So when we think about this asset model, how can we bring out all of those special qualities that kids bring to the classroom? And so the other piece that I wanted to share with you is, you may or may not have seen this graphic, but this helps you to understand how you can implement ELA literacy and ELD instruction. Whether you're a multiple subject, single subject, or world language candidate, or in this case, candidate submitting a CalTPA, understand that you are all literacy teachers, in that you are working with your students to help them understand your subject. And so the way that you look at this is, the ELD standards were revised back in 2014, 2015, and they were done in conjunction with the California Common Core standards to amplify them. So the ideas of reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language were amplified by the ELD standards in all disciplines. And so the way that you can review this graphic is to look at the 5 circles, starting at number 12 and going clockwise, is that when you are utilizing ELD standards, you're helping students to, at the top, make meaning, how they can utilize effective expression, how they build upon their foundational skills that they bring to the classroom, how it helps you develop deep content knowledge, and then also, how do you develop their language? And so in doing these 5 items, you go to what's in the white portion. And again, starting with engaging and moving clockwise, you develop engaging lessons. You are respectful to their needs as a learner. You develop activities that are intellectually challenging. You integrate subject matter, and you are able to help students see the intricacies of how subject matters all come together. And finally, you are able to produce a motivating way for students to stay focused. And ultimately, how this helps the student is in the orange band. It is building upon the capacities of literate individuals in society. It is preparing them for skills in the 21st century. It helps to make them broadly literate. And it finally gives them the readiness they need for college, career, and civic life. So I wanted to, we wanted to show you that ELD is not just for English learners. It is for all learners. The ELD standards were meant to be used for all of our learners to help them reach their potential in a language-rich classroom. So there was a question about how do you take an ELD standard and build a goal? Well, here's an example that we wanted to share with you. This is actually from a first grade standard, and you start with the ELD standard. So in this one, C11, it says that students are going to support their own opinions and evaluate other opinions in speaking and writing. Now, if you look at that particular ELD standard, it transcends all subjects, whether it's English, social studies, math, science. It's something that can be applied to all situations. So then from there, you'll write a goal. Students will be able to support at least one of their own opinions and evaluate a friend's opinion as they discuss the Three Little Pigs in small groups. So there I am focusing on the speaking. And then the second part of my goal, students will then write about their own opinions of one character from the story in a short paragraph. And then what we have listed here is, if you haven't found this resource, and I'll put it into the chat at the break, the English Learner Roadmap that has been produced by the California Department of Education is a fantastic resource that will help you in working with students on these English development goals. And I will put that I will put that link in the chat during the break. So Amy, if you could just bring us to the plan for strategies for success, and then we're going to take a little break.
All right, so to summarize a little bit here about step one, remember step one is planning instruction that is asset-based and supports the needs of your students in front of you for one lesson. So develop a lesson plan that is asset-based. What are the assets of the whole class and the 3 focus students? How is this lesson that you're going to be teaching for this performance assessment clearly built on the students' assets? How is the lesson tied to the students' cultural and linguistic funds of knowledge? How are you bringing in what it is that students already know, the experiences they have, the funds of knowledge that they have into your lesson so that they can be successful? So that's the first point. One lesson, one group of students, 3 focus students. 4, specifically focus student 2, make sure you attend the IEP 504 GATE goals or objectives that are established for that learner. So focus student 2 is going to have an IEP set of goals, or they're going to have guidelines in their 504 plan, or there's going to be guidelines again in their GATE plan. So make sure you draw upon that when you talk about how you're going to support focus student 2. Third point, make sure that the lesson plan that you use has students engaged in higher order thinking. So in your lesson, how are your students going to analyze something? How might they synthesize across ideas? How might they have data in front of them that they're evaluating, or choices that they're making? How are they interpreting information or data, or a text, or a math problem? And how might we see the students in your lesson take what they've learned and transfer it to another setting? How are you going to do that in your one lesson plan? We do need to see that higher order thinking. We are working really hard to make sure that we're moving literally away from worksheets and into hands-on learning that really allows students to access higher order thinking. And then finally, be very specific about your universal design for learning strategies. In other words, how are the students going to have multiple ways to access the content? How are you going to have multiple ways for them to express or act upon what they know? And how will they have multiple ways to engage? So very important to be able to meet these goals when you're working through step 1. All right, with that, James, I'm going to turn it back to you. And
Yes, what we'd like to do is to take a quick 5-minute break. It's 5:08, so let's come back at 5:13. If you would, please don't leave the meeting. Just simply turn off your camera and mute your audio, and then we will resume our information at 5:13. I'm going to pause the recording.
Friend Nancy. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, perfect. Recording's back on. Then in video clip 3 is where you identify the next steps for content learning. And this is where you are summarizing and formally checking with the students about the learning goal that was established. And then you are talking about what are the next steps for learning the content. And what you're going to see that I'll talk about is this is not saying classroom management, such as, okay, it's time to clean up. All right. Not saying that that's not important, but that's not the focus of what this video clip is. Remember that your video clips and the annotations are about the how and the why of what it is that you're doing. And so that's where, when we get into the annotations, you are going to, as I said before, a metacognitive activity with how you are able to look at the video and then provide for the assessor those instructional decisions that you made, either from the lesson plan or sometimes from what you're seeing as you're working with the students. Remember that, as it says in the call-out box, the candidate and the students must be visible. And then across the arc of the 3 video clips, there are annotations that will be time-stamped and that you will select a title from a drop-down list to explain in 1,000 characters or fewer these items. How did you create a positive learning environment? How did you explain those connections to prior learning? How did you engage your students in content-specific higher order thinking? How did you monitor students' understanding of content? And then finally, how did you establish those next steps for content-based learning? And then the evidence to be submitted for part 2 are the 3 annotated video clips, and they are no more than 5 minutes each. And so with that, I'm going to return back to our slide deck because I want to share with you some strategies that will help you with being successful. So in video 1, it's important that you set those expectations for learning by focusing on students' prior content knowledge. You want to be clear with this, how this lesson builds upon what they've already learned, and making that connection to what was discussed in the past and what is being focused on in the present. In video 2, students must be engaged in higher order thinking, and you want to do that by avoiding teacher-centered instruction. If you're up there talking the entire time, that's what I call a YouTube lesson. I made that reference before. No reason for the child to be there. They could just watch it on YouTube and they would get the information they need. If there is a segment of your lesson where you are doing some direct instruction, but it is going longer, I would encourage you to maybe avoid selecting that clip because, again, you want to show active learning and the use of higher order thinking. And then in video 3, what are they going to learn next? As I said before, this is not the time to say it's, make sure you do your homework or, sometimes I've seen a clip where a candidate will do an exit ticket, but they don't follow up with it. Okay, doing the exit ticket is a great strategy, but you want to follow up with it. Do it in the moment, read them. Okay, I see that someone said that they had trouble with this concept. All right, so you know what? I think what we need to do is let's review order of operations so that, and again, you're really focusing on what they're going to learn and really helping to have the students have a voice in that as well. The other thing that's not listed here, but I want to add, Amy, anecdotally, is that in terms of your annotations, we already have the what. So if you're selecting an annotation title, such as establishing a safe environment, we know that that's what you're going to talk about. So you want to avoid restating the annotation. I established a safe learning environment. Yes, okay. How? Why? How was that important? Why was that important in working with your students? Okay, so make sure your annotations are at a very higher, really a higher order thinking yourself in that metacognitive approach. So Amy, did we want to take some questions, or did we want to just move on to step 3 in terms
Well,
of
the
looking at our
one
time?
question, I'm trying to answer them in the chat as we go, and we will take live questions here at the end. But the one question I do want to make sure that everyone is really paying very close attention to, because this is important. When you're reading through the guide and you're reading through, like James, if you would bring the guide back up, let's go to video clip 1 and look at that together, the definition. So if you see the word student with a T at the end and there is no S on the word student, that's at least one student we need to see. If there's an S on the word students, we need 2 or more students. Does that make sense? We had to go, really these assessments were for the whole class. We wanted to see children and students that you're working with. But we do understand it's been difficult, and we have some online synchronous instruction happening now. And so in these cases, what you want to do is just very clearly follow what you are asked to do in the clip. So for clip 1, just scroll up for a little bit higher
I
for
was
your
just,
students. So you can see that it says students with an S. I don't know if you can circle that word, creating a positive and safe learning environment for your students with an S.
I can't annotate because it's password
Oh, that's
protected.
okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to see at least, and again, you can see the word students in that first bullet with an S. S. If it's students with an S, it's 2 or more. If it's student, no S, 1 student is fine. So let's go to clip 2. So in clip 1, it's 2 or more. In clip 2, select a portion of relation of you and the students with an S. So it's 2 or more. And here's another important thing. We need to see you in each video. So it's you and your students with an S. That's 2 or more students. Go to clip 3, please. Again, in clip 3, students with an S. So informally check for students' understanding of the learning goal. In the second bullet, establish next steps for student learning. So 2 or more students. Really, we're looking for your whole group. But when we have an S on the word student, it's at least 2 or more. Does that make sense? So in cycle 1, there are 3 video clips. In each video clip, we need 2 or more students, and we need you. In the video clip, we need to see you and we need to hear you. And that is true whether you're teaching in person or you're teaching online synchronously. It's got to be synchronous instruction, whether it's in person or online. So we can come back to that idea later, but that was the only one, James, that I wanted to really emphasize. Really important.
I completely agree. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it back to you to get us into Reflect, and I will take the chat.
Great. So in Reflect, we're going to take that big step backwards. So remember, step 1, you planned instruction. 1 group of students, 1 lesson. It's either math focused or literacy focused. You can integrate other content areas like music, art, science. We'd love to see integrated instruction, but 1 must be very firmly focused on math. 1 must be very firmly focused on literacy. So you're planning in step 1. You're planning for your group and your 3 students. Go ahead, James.
No, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Amy. I just want to make sure that we are clarifying that that is for multiple subjects. So if it's a single subject or a world language,
yes, good point.
It is in the content for which their single subject credential is then granted.
Yes, your content area. So I'm just reminding us by putting that in the chat. So in Reflect, we're going to see some prompts. We're stepping back. We planned, and then we got up on our feet and we taught and we assessed as we went through that lesson. We video recorded everything. We went back and picked out our 3 video clips that can be up to 5 minutes each. We annotated those clips so that we could point out directly to the assessor what you're doing and why you're doing it. So those 2 steps have been completed. Now we're stepping back. We're thinking about planning. We're thinking about what happened when we taught and assessed in the lesson, and we're going to reflect on our practice. So we're going to go into the guide, and take a look at that real quick. And then we'll move to step 4. But in step 3, so we move through step 2 there, we're going to go into step 3, reflect. So you're going to reflect on what you learned in your planning and in your instruction. And here's a really important thing. Those of you with a highlighter or the ability to highlight online, cite evidence from steps 1 and or 2 as you respond to these questions. So as you're thinking back about your planning and all your evidence you collected up there, and you think about what happened in your videos with your annotations, you're going to cite that evidence. So question 1, how did getting to know your students' assets and learning needs support the affirmation and validation of students' cultural and linguistic backgrounds? So how did your paying attention to their assets really help validate students' cultural and linguistic backgrounds? Second question under 1, how did understanding about their assets and learning needs allow students to access and engage with the literacy or math content, because we're looking at the multiple subjects version. So if you're in single subjects, how did they engage with art? How did they engage with music? How did they engage with agriculture? Whatever it is your content area is, how are the students accessing and engaging with that content, right? Really important. Did they learn something? That's the big question here. And if so, what was it? Question 2, how effective was your instructional approach in supporting learning for the whole class? So that whole approach, how did that work? Did it work for everybody? What didn't work? We want to know what worked and what didn't work. We want to know all your thinking here in these prompts. And then what specifically worked for your 3 focus students? And did they reach your content specific learning goals? Question 3, how effective was your instructional support in supporting learning for the English learners in your class and focus student 1 to achieve the ELD goals that you set? So how did you develop language? How did you strengthen students' use of English in your classroom? How did you support them in learning in perhaps multiple languages? But how did you do that? How did that go? And then in question 4 in this lesson, did you need to incorporate specific in the moment instructional adaptations for the whole class and the 3 students to support them? We all know as we teach and go along, often the time goes faster than we thought. Sometimes resources and materials don't pan out. Sometimes the bell rings. Sometimes it's raining outside and no one's paying attention, right? So what do you do in the moment to change your instructional approach? What adaptations do you make? And so that wraps up our reflective questions. It takes us, again, remember, so important to base everything on citations in steps 1 and 2 as you answer these questions. So that's step 3, reflection. What happened? What happened for you? What happened for the students? What happened for the 3 focus students? And it takes us into step 4, and I'll give it back to James.
Sorry, Amy, did we want to just talk about those steps for success for step 3? I think
Oh, yes.
because we had
yes,
a couple of, yeah, I think we had a couple of important elements.
Yes, so again, don't want to read the slide to you, but just take a look there. And remember, when you're writing reflectively, you really want to look back at your evidence. You want to say, when I was planning my lesson plan and thinking about how to use universal design for learning, I decided that I would let my students demonstrate in 3 different ways how they learn the content or whatever it is. And for example, that's provided here is describe what asset you found out about FS1 and then explain how learning about that specific asset led to a challenging and supporting and engaging lesson. And again, really, really important point here with the magnifying class. Try in your reflective writing to be specific to the students in front of you, specific to their assets and learning needs, specific to your 3 focus students. Be specific and detailed in your responses. Don't be general. Statements like the students learned everything I wanted them to isn't going to get you very far. We need to know specifics about what they learned, how they learned it, how they demonstrated what they learned to you, and what you learned about that. So be very specific. And then I think we have another interesting graphic here that may be helpful. Again, back to reflective writing. So in your reflective writing, you really want to be justifying your actions, thinking through how you and explaining how you solved problems in your instruction, for example, revisiting experiences and thinking about yourself. So really is reflective writing is a processing phase You're processing through what you learn and you're writing about it, in which you communicate your learning in relation to your experiences. And that's why we want you to go back and cite your evidence to steps 1 and steps 2. So reflective writing and being a reflective practitioner is a big goal for every single California educator.
Okay, so Amy, as you said, we are going to look at apply. So if you would please open your assessment guide to page 19. The final step in our inquiry cycle is to look at how we can refer to our own understanding and apply it to future situations. So I'm going to stop sharing this from the slide deck and go to the assessment guide. And it's similar somewhat in structure as Reflect, but it's looking at some more deep pieces with regard to your application of what you have learned. Now, as a reminder, as it says under the directions, you have the option in step 4 to either write a narrative of no more than 3 pages, or you may engage in a video recording of yourself of no more than 5 minutes if you decide to verbally respond to the prompt. We encourage folks to really think about using the video recording because there's sometimes a chance that you can explain more in a verbal type of situation rather than written. So please, if you find yourself extroverted and really passionate about what it is that you have done, consider that video because it might be very helpful for you to share that application. So just like step 3, there are specific prompts that are listed here. Remember that you want to cite evidence from steps 1, 2, or 3. And what you are looking at is how you advance student engagement with the lesson, content-specific learning, and their development of academic language. So in thinking about these 3 areas, the prompts provide the opportunity for you to explain those. So in the written narrative, you would simply write a response to each one of these. However, if you are doing the video recording, you would want to have these questions up so that you can refer to them in your video recording. And so there are 4 specific areas, but again, the thing that we can't stress enough is to cite evidence from the previous steps, from step 1, step 2, and or step 3. Because the application of what you've learned is very important, but you always want to base it in evidence. As many of you may be in induction now, evidence is so important in the induction process because that is how you make your instructional decisions. It's how you work with your students, and you always want to be objective in the way that you are able to provide that information. And then the evidence to be submitted is simply the narrative, no more than 3 pages, or the 5 minutes of video explanation. So with that, coming back to our slide deck, I'd like to invite you to think about some steps for strategies to be successful. Always use evidence of student learning to support your responses. Be specific and think about how this will apply to future instruction. I did this with my students. I found that 95% of them were engaged and were able to answer these questions. So this is a strategy that I would like to continue. Or I tried this when I went to do group work. It didn't appear to have the objectives that I wanted. So I need to change my directions, or I need to change the content in X, Y, and Z. Citing evidence, we have said, be clear on how your next steps will strengthen academic language development. So you want to be very specific about the academic language development for your students as it relates to the content that you are teaching. And just as a reminder, step 4 can be submitted either as a narrative or as a video. And with that, we'll take it to questions and answers. I know, Amy, you have been, I think I answered a question, so I think maybe we can continue moving forward if that would be a good for you.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move forward. I've answered the questions that came into the chat so far. So we did want to step back and spend just a few minutes. We are heading towards the top of the hour here where we're going to wrap things up right at 6. But we did want to speak a little bit with you about online settings and how you can be successful in teaching synchronously at the same time with your students in online settings. So a couple things we wanted to point out. We do want to make sure that all the same requirements are met, whether you're teaching in person or you're teaching in an online synchronous setting. It has to be synchronous. It has to be at the same time. You and the students together at the same time. We have to see you and hear you. And we just reviewed that in cycle 1 for the 3 clips, we need at least 2 or more students. And then finally, the instruction needs to, of course, be reflective of the California content standards and or curriculum frameworks. So really important. You need to be really going to the CDE, the California Department of Education website. It's linked in the guide to get those content standards and to really deeply understand what the content standards are that have been put forth by the Department of Ed. That's what we teach in our California classrooms in California. So be very careful to link your work to those standards and be very careful to make sure you have it included in English, language, development, goal, and standard. We've got to have both the content and the ELD goal and standard. Really important. Write a note to yourself. We need to see both. All right, let's keep going to our next slide. And we added just a couple of other general tips. We really need you and your students to be seen in the video. So even if you're videoing an online situation like we are together tonight and you had your camera videoing the screen, you can see me and James and others. You can see the PowerPoint we're working on. We could hear us talking back and forth. We've got to see all of that in the video, even if it's in an online setting. And then uploaded video clips do have to be continuous and unedited. You don't have to submit 5-minute clips, but you can submit up to 5 minutes, but it's got to be continuous instruction. You can't start and stop the camera. You can't move it around. So that's important to keep in mind. And then finally, you need to adhere to all school or district guidelines for recording in online settings. So we know that different districts and schools themselves have set different guidelines for their teachers as they work with their students around what is appropriate to record and what is not. But you do have to have video recordings for the CalTPA. So you're going to have to work all that out and make sure that you have those permissions in place and make sure that it is okay to video online work. And we wanted to make sure we shared program support. So again, I'll turn it back to James.
Thank you, Amy. And Amy, there are some questions in the chat and I didn't answer them only because they're a little bit more involved. So I want to maybe at our end, which is coming up with the final Q&A, that
Sure.
we would like to respond to those. So what we have put in place for candidates is we do have weekly office hours. They are every Wednesday from 4:15 to 5. And these are specific for candidates who need to take and pass the CalTPA. You'll see that the Zoom is listed here. This Zoom link works for every Wednesday. And so we strongly encourage you to come for these 45 minutes because commission staff monitors these office hours. And this is an excellent time for you to come in and have dedicated time with those of us who work with the CalTPA to answer your questions. In some cases, it might be helpful for your mentor to come along with you so that you can have that extra support and that maybe you can hear the information together. And yes, we will put this web link, or excuse me, the Zoom link in the chat. The commission does have its own YouTube channel. So it is listed here, but really what you want to focus on is the playlist upon which this particular webinar recording will be provided. And so I will put that into the chat as well. It's a bit.ly so that we could shorten the URL. But if you go to that particular playlist, it will have all of the information, not just from what we've done today and what we will do with cycle 2 in January, but also a number of deep dives for the CalTPA that will be highly beneficial to you and what you may find to be important to you as you are going through this process with the CalTPA. And so with that, Amy, we are at our final Q&A. So with your permission, I'd like to take us into gallery view and maybe allow us to be able to see who's with us and be able to answer these questions.
Great. I think that's great. So
And
hey,
while you're
everybody,
doing that,
glad you're with
Amy,
us. Yeah.
I'm gonna put those URLs into the chat if you would take the first
Okay.
set of questions.
All right. So I'm gonna go into our chat back a little bit. The first question I'm going to go back to, because I think we were able to put answers in the chat to many, and hang on to your question. If we didn't get to it yet, know that we will. We told you how to reach out to us if for some reason tonight we can't get to it by 6. But this first question is from Brian, and it's about part 1, getting to know your students, section 1. Do we literally have to break down each section separately into explicit asset and learning needs sections? No, you do not. You can combine them, but do be clear about what the assets are and what the learning needs are. Daisy has questions about the video. So Daisy, in a minute, we'll let you unmute and ask them. Is there a template for part A that will guide your writing? And James got back to you saying that there is a template for part A that will guide your writing. And will we have an opportunity of yes, Daisy? And then let's see, next question. I have a multiple subject and a single subject credential. I think, Jared, that you're working on simultaneously. If I were to do the CalTPA in MS, will it also count for SS? The answer is yes. In your career as a teacher, you will do a teaching performance assessment one time. The one instance where you would have to do a second performance assessment is if later in your career you decide to be an administrator and you enter an administration program. There is a performance assessment that administrative services candidates take, and you would have to take that one. But for all of your teaching experiences, teaching credentials, if you add credentials, please know you will take a teaching performance assessment once, and that will hold for the rest of your career at this time. Can I use school written permission for my video? Yes, if parents sign a media permission at the beginning of the year, that can be used, but it's always important to check in with your school, with your supervising teacher, with your program, make sure that that is in fact true. But if there are signed media forms at the school and you know each of your students has one on file, you are good to go. We had some questions then that came up from Darcy about the camera itself. Can the camera switch back and forth? Yes, it can. What we need is just continuous instruction. So the camera can move around the room. We've had teachers that have moved the camera with them as they're working in the small groups. We really want to see the students in these videos. So yes, you can move the camera around. So that is true for the next question. It does not have to stay in one place. You can move the camera around. We had a question about a link, which James is working on getting into the chat.
Yes, I did put 3 URLs. I put the Zoom link for the Wednesday office hours. I also put in the bit.ly for the CalTPA YouTube playlist. And I also put in the URL for the California ELD roadmap.
Fantastic, thank you. Here is a great question. Do I have to be in view on the video the entire time as a teacher? And the answer is no. Just at some point, we need to see you in the video at some point during the 5 minutes. And then we have James's great information there. And then Brian on my CalTPA assessment guide. There is no mention of ELD goals. Okay, that's because you're in world languages. So you're okay, Brian. And then thank you so much for that information. So glad you liked it. So how else can we help? So at this point, I see a couple hands up.
Yes,
so we'll go ahead and take some live questions. James, go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say, Daisy, you had your hand up first. So if you could please unmute and ask your question.
Uh-huh. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a teacher that supports a candidate, and I will be in charge of helping him record. So I just want to make sure I'm really clear. Do you have to hear the students' conversation on the video? Like if they're doing productive group work, do we really center the camera on that group for them to, for him, for the voice to be, because we've been practicing and we're able to get a really clear sound from the teacher, but it's really hard to hear the students unless we put the microphone right on front of them. So do you need to have a really clear sound from the student conversation?
Yes, so we must absolutely be able to hear, we have to hear the students. So yes is the answer to your question. Yes, we have to hear them.
One more. So can we use two different cameras, one to record from the distance and then another one just right on the group? So
You
hear-
cannot edit your video clips. So
But can
you need to use, what we have found that the majority of our teacher candidates use iPhones of some kind. And typically the audio and the imagery it works just fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But we do have to hear both. So that's why we encourage candidates to video record everything in the lesson, everything, start to finish, so that you have lots of video to go back and pick and choose from. That's an important thing. I think it seems to have been more of a struggle for candidates that try to just capture their 5-minute clip. It's better to video record everything and then go back and find your clips. Here is another suggestion. We think that you absolutely should not be video recording for the very first time when you're trying to complete this performance assessment. You should be practicing this over and over and over again before you're ready to submit. So, you need to get your students used to video, and James is going to add an important idea.
I was just going to say, Amy, having taught high school for a number of years, if you do it the first time, especially with ninth graders and sometimes even with seniors, they may do something that you don't want in that video. So you have to get them used to the process, so that what happens is after 15 seconds, the camera becomes a piece of furniture.
Exactly.
Amy, we also have a question from Raquel. She says, if I am teaching in Spanish, I believe it's a world language, or could be bilingual, we might need to get clarification. How does that affect the issue with ELD learners?
Yes, and Raquel, there's a whole section on the website to help you think through this.
Thank you.
You are absolutely invited to teach in your language of instruction and to complete all of your feedback in the language of instruction. We will find an assessor who speaks the language of instruction to be the assessor for your submission. And you will go to this website that I put in the link here, and it will talk to you about how you handle the ELD. So we all understand through translanguaging and current research that when we help students improve in their language of instruction, that it will improve their English language as well. So there is writing in there about that, and I invite you to go read about that on our website. Our assessors assigned by grade level. Assessors may only score if they hold the same credential for which you are attempting to achieve. So multiple subject credentialed faculty, pre-K-12 educators who hold multiple subject credentials and/or multiple subject methods, instructors and faculty are the ones who are allowed to score the multiple subjects version. If it is a single subject submission, it must be scored by a single subject credential holder and/or single subject methods faculty instructor, if that makes sense. So yes, we match content expertise to content credential submissions. So that was for Olivia.
Okay, let's see. Recorded a lesson over Zoom last year and submitted my cycle 1. Failed to pass by a couple of points. Would you advise that I start over completely or try to revise what I had originally done and resubmit?
So, Siobhan, that is a great question. And it all depends is the answer, which is probably not the answer you're looking for. But you need to determine, hopefully with the guidance of your supervising teacher or your induction mentors or someone in your preliminary program, together you should be making this decision. So it could work if you have a clear recorded lesson and you have enough video recording to pick your 3 clips and to do your annotations. But it's going to be your judgment call. It may be more beneficial for you to start again and to, you're teaching lessons every day. So you could video record a lesson you're teaching now. It really is your choice, your call. It just depends. It is okay to do that, but it just depends on, maybe you're, after multiple months of teaching here, you feel stronger about your teaching practice and you'd prefer to submit that performance instead. So it's really up to you and those who are helping support you through this process.
And Amy, we have Mackenzie has raised her hand. So Mackenzie, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
So I was wondering if the versions change by academic year or is it calendar year? I have version 4 currently for single subject, but I didn't know if there was a 4.1 that I hadn't gotten a hold of.
Sounds like you have the right version. They
Okay.
are, so what happens is at the end of the academic year in the spring, if you're in a traditional academic year, in the spring, we have collected and continue to collect all kinds of information from our assessors, from program coordinators, from even candidates as we engage with them. And then we take all of that information and we make revisions to try and clarify the text or clarify a prompt or clarify language in a rubric. And it's always a very minor kind of thing, but we do think it makes the assessment stronger. So we promise to keep making it clearer and stronger as we went. So new edits will appear in the summer, right? In the month of July for whatever, for when the assessment is released in July and August. That's when you'll see the revised version for the coming year.
Okay, so I need to follow the one that I currently have if I'm going to submit in March, because that's my plan, is to submit in March.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You will be just fine. And as a reminder, whatever form you submit, we will take it and we will score it. It's just to your advantage to put it in the new form because there are slight tweaks that might be helpful to you. So we really do recommend that even if you filled out last year's forms, that you might cut and paste and bring it over and make sure that everything is as clear and detailed as possible for your final submission for a score. But you can submit on last year's forms. Yeah, you're so welcome.
Okay, Amy, no other question has come through in the chat. So if someone else would like to raise their hand to ask a question, we have about 4 minutes left. And just a reminder, Amy, we do have some email addresses that we want to leave our participants with before we end. Should we go ahead
we just want to let you all know that we will be moving through cycle 2 in a very similar way to tonight as an academy kind of approach with live students in early January. So if you are finished with cycle 1 and or just finishing cycle 1 and eager to learn about cycle 2 or engage in cycle 2, know that an academy will be coming your way in early January. So back to you, James, for these final websites.
Yes, thank you so much, Amy. There are some contact pieces of information that we wanted to leave you with. The first one is if you have a general question about the CalTPA, this is the dedicated mailbox that is monitored by our staff so that you can ask a question and have someone reach back out to you. If you are needing assistance with the system uploading, anything to do on a technical area, then we encourage you to contact Evaluation Systems either through the phone number or by going to this website and identifying the contact with whom you would like to engage with in your question. And then finally, we have put it into the chat a few times, but the website for the CalTPA performance assessment and also other information related to the CalTPA can be found at the CTC exams website. So with that, Amy, what I'm going to do is just take us out of this slideshow mode so that I can put in the email addresses for our candidates, and I'll let you do any final words or.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, James, so much. I did just put in the chat, just a reminder, we are here for you. We want to help you be successful. We want you to stay in the great profession of teaching, and we want to make sure that you know how to reach us. So again, on Wednesday afternoon, starting at 4:15 until 5, we have open office hours, and we are available to answer your questions. So please do join us on Wednesdays. And we also have our YouTube channel with all kinds of recorded information that could be very helpful to you. And we will be offering the Second Academy on Cycle 2 in January. So please do be in touch or email us at our contact email. And we typically turn things right around as quickly as we can, because we know that you need our responses as quickly as you can get them. So we are so appreciative of all the hard work that you are going through to become teachers. And we thank you for being with us this afternoon.
And I would just add that this recording I will upload as soon as we're done here. I will render the recording and then have it up on our playlist for the CalTPA.
All right. So we look very much forward in hearing from each and every one of you as often as you need to get in touch with us. And we hope you have a great holiday season coming up here and you get a good rest and you're ready to go when January comes. And we'll be back live with you in early January. So take care and good luck with everything. And remember, please do get in touch if you have any questions at all. So thanks, James. And James, you said bye, I think, and everyone's saying bye in the chat. So see ya. Have a great couple of weeks ahead and good luck with everything.